In the middle of a tense courtroom, Officer Frank Miller lashes out, kicking a quiet Latino defendant as if he owned the place. But Leo Vance isn't just any man. He's a former Green Beret with a past no one in that room could imagine. Then a single phone call shatters the arrogance in Miller's eyes and freezes everyone in place. What truth could turn a cop's swagger into silence in seconds? Hit like, share your thoughts, and subscribe. Now let's uncover exactly what happened that day. I'll never forget the first time I saw Leo Vance. 35, Latino, built like someone who'd carried more than his share of weight in life. Broad shoulders, strong frame, but he sat in the defendant's chair like a man who'd been told one too many times to stay quiet if you know what's good for you. A plain gray shirt, worn jeans, hands resting calmly on the table. But his eyes stayed low, locked on the grain of the wood. The charge was loitering near an old warehouse district. On paper, it sounded almost laughable, but in here, the air buzzed with whispers painting him as dangerous, unpredictable. By the time truth shows up in a Rust Belt city, the rumors have already taken root and grown into a monster. The heavy courtroom doors banged open. Officer Frank Miller strode in. White, tall, and thick-necked, his uniform pressed sharp enough to cut glass. Every step echoed off the walls. He locked eyes on Leo and didn't look away. When he passed the defense table, he leaned in just enough for the front row to hear. "Didn't think you'd have the guts to show up," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Leo didn't move, not even a flicker, just blinked once. Slow. Judge Eleanor Prentice adjusted her glasses and glanced down from the bench. Late 50s, white, her lips pressed into a thin line. She scanned the room like she was taking inventory. Then her gaze lingered on Leo, cool and unblinking. She didn't need to say a word. The tilt of her head already carried judgment. Sarah Chen, his public defender, leaned closer. "Just let me do the talking," she whispered. Her tone was steady, but her eyes betrayed it. She could feel the tilt of the room, the way it leaned hard against them. Leo's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "You think they want to hear the truth?" he murmured back. From the press row, Ben Carter, young, eager, not yet worn down by the grind, was watching more than listening. His pen stilled when he caught something no one else seemed to notice. Leo's left hand drifted almost without thought to a long, pale scar running along his wrist. His fingers pressed there for a second, then stilled. Ben wrote just one word in his notebook. "Why?" The side door opened, and David Ross, the court clerk, stepped in with a stack of files. He was halfway to his desk when his gaze fell on Leo. His brows shot up, a flicker of recognition flashing before he forced it away. He dropped the files a little too loudly and busied himself with paperwork. Every sound seemed louder than it should have been. The shuffle of shoes, the creak of the bench, the faint hum of the air vent overhead. The tension wasn't just in the air. It was in the way people sat straighter when Leo moved, the way their eyes darted to Miller for cues. And through it all, Leo Vance sat silent, not defeated, just waiting, like a man who knew the weight of the moment and that when it broke, it wouldn't be him on the floor. Miller cleared his throat and leaned into the microphone as if the entire room existed solely to hear him. When I approached the defendant, he began, glancing toward Leo with a practiced air. He was agitated, belligerent, the kind of man who thinks rules don't apply to him. People like that, you never know when they'll turn violent. The words landed heavy in the room. People like that. No one needed a dictionary to decode it. Leo sat perfectly still, his hands clasped together, thumbs pressed so tightly they turned white. His gaze stayed fixed on the table, not the man throwing poison darts at his character. Sarah was on her feet before Miller could continue. Objection. Your Honor, there's no evidence my client was violent. This is prejudicial. Judge Prentice didn't even glance up from her notes. Overruled. Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line, but she sat back down slowly. For the record, she murmured under her breath, we're not letting that slide. Miller went on, embellishing every detail. He spoke of erratic behavior, of a threatening stance, painting Leo as if he'd stepped straight out of a mugshot. The fact that Leo had been waiting for a city bus never made it into Miller's version. When he finally stepped down from the stand, he didn't head straight for his seat. He took the long way, right past the defense table. Look at me when I'm talking to you, Miller muttered, low enough that only Leo and Sarah could hear. Leo didn't move. He breathed in 4 seconds, out 4 seconds. The years had taught him that some battles weren't worth fighting head-on. Not yet. Sarah whispered, "Ignore him." But Miller couldn't leave it there. As he passed, his boot shot out sharp and fast and connected hard with Leo's shin under the table. The sound wasn't loud, but the reaction was instant. A woman in the second row gasped. "Did he just—" the bailiff barked, stepping forward. Sarah shot up again. "Your Honor, the arresting officer just assaulted my client in open court." "Counsel," Prentice interrupted, her tone like ice. "Sit down, or I will clear this courtroom." With respect, Sarah's voice didn't waver. Let the record reflect the officer physically struck my client. Prentice set her pen down a little too carefully. The record will reflect whatever I say it reflects. Now move on. From the press row, Ben's camera clicked twice in rapid succession. Through his lens, he caught Miller's smirk and Leo's stillness, a perfect contrast between arrogance and restraint. His fingers flew over his pager, typing a message to his editor's desk. Assault in open court. Photo coming. Leo's hand drifted to the pale seam of the scar on his wrist before stilling. Not here, not now. He lifted his head, his eyes locking on Miller with a calm so sharp it cut deeper than rage. Miller's grin faltered. Just for a second, he looked like a man who'd heard a noise behind him in a dark alley. Sarah leaned closer to Leo. "We'll file it. We'll put it on the record properly." Leo gave the smallest nod. Judge Prentice tapped her pen twice, then stood. "We'll take a brief recess," she announced. The benches creaked as the gallery exhaled. Conversations sparked in whispers. Miller adjusted his sleeve like nothing had happened, but the shift in the room was undeniable. A line had been crossed, one everyone had just seen. And while no one could know it yet, that single moment was about to set something much bigger in motion. The recess lasted all of 10 minutes, but Miller came back into the courtroom with the swagger of a man who'd already won. He slid into the witness chair again, stretching his legs like it was his living room. As I was saying, he picked up without missing a beat. The defendant was combative from the start. Raised his voice, got in my face. "People like him?" His smirk flicked toward Leo. "They escalate things. It's what they do." A couple of people in the gallery snorted quietly. One man shook his head, murmuring something to the woman beside him. Sarah shot a look over her shoulder, her eyes warning them to keep their opinions to themselves. She rose again. "Objection. This is character assassination, not fact." "Overruled," Prentice said, barely glancing up. Her tone carried the same subtle disdain it had earlier, but now it was more pronounced, less hidden. Sarah didn't sit right away. "Your Honor, I have a witness who can testify Mr. Vance was assisting an elderly woman at the time this so-called incident occurred." Prentice cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Not relevant. This case is about what happened afterward." "Which my witness can speak to directly," Sarah pressed. "Not relevant," Prentice's voice sharpened. Sarah exhaled through her nose and sat, the frustration radiating from her. Leo remained still, but the small twitch in his jaw betrayed what he felt. A clerk crossed the courtroom with a stack of files. One slipped from the pile, fluttering down near the defense table. Before anyone else even registered it, Leo leaned down, scooping it up in one smooth, precise motion, like a reflex drilled into him. Not a conscious decision. His movements were quick but controlled, the way someone trained to act under pressure would move. Ben noticed. His camera lowered just slightly as his eyes narrowed. That wasn't just quick. That was military quick. Miller noticed too. His lip curled into something between a sneer and a grin. As Leo straightened, Miller leaned forward on the witness stand, lowering his voice so it barely carried beyond the table. "Not so tough now, huh?" Leo met his eyes for half a heartbeat. Calm, unblinking. He didn't answer, but his silence was a weight, one Miller couldn't quite shrug off. Ben's fingers drummed on his notebook. He had been jotting down Miller's testimony, but now something bothered him. The timeline Miller was spinning. It didn't match the reports he'd reviewed earlier. And the way Miller described Leo's actions, overblown, vague, smelled of fabrication. Ben leaned to the reporter beside him. "You catch that? That's not what's in the incident log." The other reporter raised an eyebrow but kept typing. Meanwhile, near the back, David Ross, usually a quiet background presence, slipped out the side door of the courtroom. His steps were brisk, his face tight. Once in the hallway, he pulled a quarter from his pocket and dialed fast from the payphone. "Yeah. It's him," David said, his voice low but urgent. "I'm telling you, I just saw it. No, I'm not guessing." "I know." A pause. "You need to get here. Now." Back inside, Miller kept talking, twisting details like a knife, each embellishment landing harder than the last. Leo's posture never changed, but the muscle along his temple ticked. Sarah kept her eyes on her notes, though her pen moved less now. She was listening for an opening, a crack in Miller's story she could pry apart. And Ben. Ben kept glancing between Leo, Miller, and his own scribbles, the pieces starting to shift into place. Somewhere, a storm was building. The tension in the courtroom had settled into something heavy and unspoken, until the sharp ring of the clerk's desk phone cut through it like a blade. Everyone's heads turned. In a room where every sound had weight, that sudden trill felt almost rude, almost wrong. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with glasses perched low on her nose, picked up the receiver. Superior Court Clerk's office. She listened for all of 3 seconds, and then her eyes flicked, unblinking, toward Leo. Her posture stiffened. Color drained just slightly from her face. "Yes," she said, her voice softer now. "One moment, please." She covered the receiver with her palm and looked directly at Judge Prentice. "Your Honor, urgent call. They say it's from the Department of Defense. They're asking for you, by name." That got people's attention. You could feel it, like the air shifted in the room. Prentice's brows pulled together. "The Department of Defense?" Her tone was skeptical, almost dismissive. "This is a court proceeding. Tell them—" "They insist it's urgent," the clerk interrupted, "which was something you didn't do to Judge Prentice. And they mentioned the defendant by name." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Even Sarah's pen paused mid-note. Prentice reached for the phone, her movements slow but deliberate, as if to show everyone she wasn't rattled. She pressed the receiver to her ear. "This is Judge Prentice," she said, crisp and authoritative. The courtroom went silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Prentice's face stayed composed at first. Then her eyes flickered, just barely, as the voice on the other end kept speaking. Her hand shifted on the receiver. "You're certain?" she asked, her voice now quieter, almost strained. She glanced, quick and sharp, at Leo. He was still sitting perfectly still, but something in the way he held himself now felt different. "Yes," Prentice said into the phone. "Yes, I understand. No, he hasn't." She stopped mid-sentence, lips pressing into a thin line. "I see. We'll accommodate that request." When she hung up, the room waited for an explanation that didn't come right away. Miller, arms folded, let out a low chuckle, like he was humoring a bad joke. "What's next?" he said under his breath. "A UFO outside?" Sarah shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass, but he didn't notice or didn't care. Prentice stood, the authority in her voice returning full force. "Court will recess now." The bailiff blinked. "Your Honor, we still have—" "Now," she repeated, the word heavier this time. Benches scraped as people stood, some confused, others curious. Ben leaned toward Sarah. That didn't sound like just any phone call. She didn't answer, eyes still locked on Leo. At the far end of the room, David Ross reappeared. He moved toward the door like a man who didn't want attention, phone already back in his pocket. He had done his part. A message had been delivered. They're on their way. Rumor travels faster than truth inside a courthouse. By the time the recess clock had ticked 5 minutes, whispers were already curling along the hallway like smoke. "Did you hear? They say he used to be in the military." The voice came from somewhere near the water cooler, low enough to seem discreet, but loud enough for half the corridor to hear. Heads tilted, eyes slid toward Leo, who stood a few feet away, his back against the wall, hands loosely clasped in front of him. Miller, leaning against a marble column, smirked, as if the hallway were his personal stage. "If he's a hero," he drawled, just loud enough for the nearest cluster to catch, "then I'm the President of the United States." A couple of his buddies chuckled, their laughter sharp and quick, like the snap of a match being lit. Sarah's heels clicked against the floor as she approached Leo. "They're talking about you," she murmured, tilting her head toward the knot of onlookers. "Is any of it true?" Leo didn't meet her gaze. His eyes stayed fixed on a point far down the hallway. "It's complicated," he said, the words soft but edged, like something meant to close the door rather than open it. Sarah studied him for a moment, reading the tension in the set of his jaw. She wanted to press, but before she could, David Ross appeared at her side. He didn't bother with a greeting, just leaned in enough that his words were for her ears alone. "I made a call," he said quietly. His tone carried the weight of something already in motion, something that couldn't be taken back. "You'll see." Sarah glanced from him to Leo, trying to fit the pieces together. "What call?" she asked, but David was already stepping away, as if the conversation had ended before it began. A few feet away, Ben was hunched over his bag, swapping out a roll of film. He had the shot, Miller's boot, striking Leo's leg in open court, and now it was safely tucked away. He could already picture the headline, "Officer Assaults Defendant in Courtroom," the kind of image that demanded attention, the kind that made people stop and look. "This goes to the dark room in minutes," Ben muttered to himself, his hands working with practiced speed. His pulse was steady, but his jaw was tight. He knew this photo could blow the story wide open, but it could also make things ugly fast. Leo shifted his weight, glancing down the hallway, as if sensing something before anyone else did. A moment later, the glass door at the far end swung open, letting in a slice of afternoon light, and with it a man no one recognized. He wasn't in uniform, just dark slacks, a pressed shirt, and a jacket that hung a little too neatly on his frame. His eyes swept the hallway, sharp and assessing, until they landed on Leo. The change was subtle but undeniable. His posture straightened, his steps slowed for half a beat. It wasn't fear, more like recognition, the kind you see between soldiers who've crossed the same ground. Leo's brow lifted a fraction, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his expression. The man gave the smallest nod, barely there, before turning and slipping into a side corridor without another word. The entire exchange took less than 3 seconds, but Sarah noticed. So did Ben. And so did Miller, though he covered it with another sarcastic grin, like the moment had been nothing at all. "What was that?" Sarah asked under her breath. Leo exhaled slowly. "Nothing you need to worry about." But she could tell it wasn't nothing. His voice had changed. Calmer, steadier. Whatever that brief connection was, it had settled something inside him. The hallway seemed to grow tighter, the air heavier. Conversations faltered, replaced by the sound of footsteps echoing off the marble. Somewhere down the hall, a secretary's typewriter clacked, an oddly outdated soundtrack to the tension building between these walls. Ben zipped his camera bag shut, his eyes still fixed on Leo. "Your story's about to be everywhere," he said. Leo didn't reply. He didn't need to. His silence wasn't empty. It was deliberate, the kind that makes people fill it with their own speculation. Miller, restless with the lull, pushed off the wall and started toward Leo, his voice dripping with mockery. "So, Green Beret, huh? Or was it just a summer camp where they taught you how to stand still and look tough?" Leo's gaze lifted, slow and deliberate, until his eyes locked with Miller's. No words, just that same steady look, the kind that could make a man forget his next insult. The moment stretched, taut as a wire. Then the bailiff's voice broke through from the double doors. "Courtroom will reconvene in 5 minutes." Sarah felt her heartbeat pick up. David was still off to the side, watching with a neutral expression. Ben shifted his weight, glancing toward the entrance like he expected someone important to walk through any second. And Leo. Leo just stood there, the calm at the center of a storm no one else could see yet. If there's one thing about Officer Miller, it's that he never quits when he thinks he's winning. The recess had barely stretched past 10 minutes when I saw him slip away from the hallway crowd, disappearing through a side door. He wasn't headed for the restroom. I knew that much. Miller had the look of a man who wanted a word with someone who could make things happen. Turns out he found Judge Prentice. They spoke just out of earshot, tucked into the alcove near her chambers. But I caught enough of Miller's posture to know he wasn't asking for mercy. He leaned in, shoulders squared, gesturing toward the courtroom like Leo was a live grenade that needed defusing. "A dangerous man like that, you don't drag this out, Judge," Miller said, his voice low but edged. "The longer he's in here, the more chance something goes sideways. Let's cut the nonsense and get him processed." Prentice didn't exactly agree, but she didn't argue either. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing just slightly, the kind of expression that said she was at least willing to let Miller keep pushing. And that was all Miller needed. Permission without a paper trail. Back in the hallway, Sarah's pager buzzed. She stepped aside, frowning as she read the numeric message, a code she recognized from a burner phone. "They're coming. Hold your ground." Her pulse quickened. She glanced at Leo, who was still standing where she'd left him, arms loose at his sides, expression unreadable. She didn't tell him about the page. Not yet. Then Miller came back in. And he didn't just walk into the courtroom. He prowled. You could see it in the set of his shoulders, the tilt of his chin. He was the kind of man who believed that if you pressed hard enough, even steel would bend. He stopped right next to Leo, close enough that the space between them was nothing but shared breath. His voice dropped to that tone meant for maximum venom. "Figures," he muttered, loud enough for the front row to hear. "Another hot-headed Latino who thinks the world owes him something. Let me tell you, boy." A couple of people in the gallery stiffened. One man turned his head sharply, ready to intervene if things got physical. Leo didn't move, didn't blink. People like you end up exactly where they belong, in chains or in the ground. The air shifted. You could feel it, like the moment before a thunderclap when the whole world holds its breath. Miller was waiting for him to explode, waiting for an outburst he could spin into proof that Leo was a threat. But Leo just tilted his head slowly. His voice was low, steady, and so calm it cut deeper than a shout ever could. "Your time's almost up." It wasn't a threat, not exactly. It was a statement, the kind you say when you already know how the next few minutes will play out. For the first time that day, Miller's smirk faltered. Just a flicker. But it was there, a split-second crack in the armor. He covered it with a scoff, straightening up and stepping back. But I saw it. And so did Sarah, and maybe even Prentice, who was watching from the bench with a frown that wasn't there before. The bailiff announced for everyone to take their seats. People shuffled back into place, the scrape of chairs echoing against the paneled walls. Sarah sat down, her eyes flicking between Miller, Prentice, and Leo. That page still burned in her mind. They're coming. Ben adjusted his camera, ready for whatever was about to happen. David Ross slid into his seat near the back, his face a mask of professional calm. Leo eased back into his chair at the defense table, posture loose but gaze steady. Miller, on the other hand, stayed standing for a moment too long, like he wanted one last angle to play. But whatever advantage he thought he had, it was slipping. Because here's the thing. You could almost feel the change in the room. It wasn't just tension anymore. It was anticipation. Like everyone, even the ones who had no idea why, sensed something was coming. And Leo, he didn't just sense it, he was waiting for it. It started with a sound most people in that courthouse had never heard in their lives. The deep, throaty growl of military-grade Humvee engines idling just beyond the courthouse gates. At first, no one paid much attention. The trial was still in recess, and the low hum was just background noise against the murmur of the crowd. But then came the sharp click of multiple doors opening, followed by the heavy, synchronized thud of boots hitting pavement. Not the shuffle of courthouse security. No, this was different, precise, measured. People began shifting in their seats, glancing toward the tall windows. Even Judge Prentice leaned slightly, trying to catch a glimpse past the blinds. Then the front doors swung open. 4 men strode in. Their uniforms weren't the crisp blues of local police, but the green and brown of army dress uniforms, with insignia stitched into the shoulders. Special Forces dress, the kind you didn't wear unless you'd earned it through decades of service. Their steps were deliberate, their eyes scanning the room in quick, sweeping arcs. Not a word was spoken, but the message was clear. They weren't here to watch. Sarah's breath caught. Ben lowered his camera for the first time all day. Miller moved before anyone else could, stepping into their path with a hand raised like he had any authority here. "You can't just walk in here," he barked, his voice echoing harder than he meant it to. The man at the front didn't even slow down. He brushed past Miller's outstretched arm like it wasn't there, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the officer. And that's when I saw him, the one every eye would remember later. General Elias Thorne. Even out of uniform, his presence would have commanded the room. But in full dress greens, with the burnished rows of service ribbons and the hard lines of a man who'd spent a lifetime giving orders under fire, there was no mistaking who he was. His voice cut through the air like a well-aimed round. "Where's Leo Vance?" The gallery froze. You could almost hear the collective question hanging there. Why is a 4-star general looking for a man on trial for loitering? Leo didn't move at first. He sat perfectly still, letting the weight of that question settle over the room. Then, slowly, he stood. His eyes met Thorne's, and for a moment there was nothing else. No courtroom, no judge, no Miller. Just the quiet lock of recognition between two men who knew exactly who the other was. Thorne's expression shifted just slightly into something you almost never saw on a man like him. Respect. Not the polite kind. The kind born from history, from trust, forged somewhere far away from the polished wood and gavel in front of us. Leo gave a single nod. Thorne returned it. No handshake, no embrace. They didn't need it. That was when the room truly changed. You could feel it. A silent ripple that moved from the front row to the very back. Even those who had no clue what was happening could tell the balance of power had just tipped, and it wasn't in Miller's favor anymore. Prentice cleared her throat, the sound strangely tight. General Thorne, this is... I know exactly where I am, Judge, Thorne interrupted without looking away from Leo. And I'm not here to play politics. Someone in the back whispered, "What the hell is going on?" Another person muttered, "I told you he wasn't just some guy." Miller tried again, his tone sharp. "Sir, with all due respect." But Thorne turned his head just enough for his eyes to meet Miller's, and the words died in Miller's throat. It wasn't a glare. It was worse. The kind of measured, unimpressed stare that told you you'd already said too much. Sarah glanced at David Ross, who was watching the entire scene like a man who'd just won a bet he'd been holding on to for years. David's quiet call from the payphone had worked. "They're here." Outside, another Humvee door shut. More footsteps approached. Inside, though, no one moved. No one even breathed too loudly. Because whether they understood the specifics or not, everyone in that room knew one thing. Something big had just walked in, and it was about to change everything. Leo didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just stood there, steady as stone, like this was exactly how it was supposed to unfold. And for the first time since the morning started, it wasn't Miller running the show anymore. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension from General Thorne's entrance still hung in the air like a storm about to break. Then, without asking permission, Thorne stepped forward, his boots striking the floor with a weight that made people sit straighter. He stopped at Judge Prentice's bench, placing a flat leather attaché case on top. The sound was soft, but it landed like a hammer. "Your Honor," Thorne said, his voice steady but edged with command. "This must be entered into the record immediately." Prentice eyed the case, suspicion flickering across her face. "And what exactly is this?" "Declassified just hours ago," Thorne replied, locking eyes with her. "Department of Defense authorization. For you and you alone." Prentice hesitated, glancing toward Miller as if seeking silent backup. Then curiosity, or maybe unease, pushed her forward. She opened the folder. At first her expression barely shifted, but as her eyes scanned line after line, the mask cracked. Her lips parted slightly, her brows pulled together, and finally a faint tremor in her hand betrayed her. Thorne turned toward the room, his voice filling every corner. "You've been told this man is the defendant, Leo Vance. But that's not the truth. Not all of it." The gallery leaned forward almost in unison. Miller folded his arms, trying to look bored, but his jaw had tightened. "Leo Vance," Thorne continued, "is a decorated Green Beret. The man who led one of the most dangerous hostage rescues in recent history, an operation spanning 3 countries deep in hostile territory. He went in with 6 men. He came out with every single hostage alive. 23 souls. Not one left behind." A sharp gasp echoed from the back row. Sarah's fingers curled over the bench, her knuckles white. Ben's camera felt heavy in his hands. "Most of you have never heard of it," Thorne said, "because the mission's records were sealed, wiped from public view to protect him from the cartels still hunting him. He's not just a veteran. He's a man who's still serving this country in ways most of us can't begin to imagine." Prentice's eyes darted from the file to Leo, then back again. "And right now," Thorne went on, "Leo Vance is a protected witness in a federal investigation tied directly to national security. His safety isn't a courtesy, it's the law. Any harm against him is a federal offense." The words hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Miller's smirk faltered. His face went pale. Because suddenly, that kick he'd thrown earlier wasn't just misconduct. It was assaulting a federally protected Green Beret. That could end careers. That could end lives as he knew them. Prentice shifted in her seat, her gavel hand twitching. "Admiral, are you saying—" "I'm saying," Thorne cut in, his voice sharp as a blade, "that the Department of Defense is now fully aware of how Mr. Vance has been treated in this courtroom. And I will personally see to it that every action taken against him today is reviewed by the U.S. Attorney's Office." "This ends now?" The room erupted in whispers. David Ross sat back, a faint, knowing smile on his lips, like he'd been waiting for this very moment. Sarah turned to Leo, her eyes wide, but he stood unmoving, calm, composed, the faintest glint in his gaze. Miller, still rooted to his spot, muttered under his breath, "This is ridiculous." Leo's head turned slowly toward him. "I told you," he said quietly, his voice low but carrying. "Your time's almost up." For the first time all day, Miller didn't have an answer. He swallowed hard and looked away. Prentice cleared her throat, but the authority in her voice was gone. "Given these revelations, the court will adjust proceedings accordingly." Her words felt forced, dragged out of her like she'd rather choke on them than say them aloud. Ben fumbled for a fresh roll of film, his mind racing. "We have a bombshell." Up at the bench, Thorne gathered his attaché case with military precision. "We're not here to disrupt justice, Your Honor," he said evenly. "We're here to make sure it's actually served." No one argued. No one even breathed too loudly. And in the center of it all, Leo Vance, once just another defendant in jeans, now stood as the calm eye of a hurricane that had turned the entire room inside out. It happened so fast, most people didn't realize what was going on until the sound of heavy boots hit the courtroom floor. Two military police officers in crisp dress uniforms stepped inside, the glint of brass on their caps catching the light. In one of their hands was a folded document with a red seal. They didn't ask for permission. They walked straight to General Thorne and handed it over. Thorne turned toward Judge Prentice, his voice steady but cutting through the air. "Your Honor, by order of the United States Department of Justice and under federal statute, we are here to execute an arrest warrant for Officer Frank Miller." He paused just long enough for every head in the room to turn toward the man, for assaulting a federally protected witness. The words hit like a gunshot. Miller blinked as if he hadn't heard right. Then, with a scoff, he stepped back from the table. "You've got to be kidding me." The military police didn't smile. "Sir, stand up. I'm not going anywhere," Miller snapped, his voice rising. "You don't walk into my courtroom." "This isn't your courtroom," Thorne interrupted, his tone dropping lower, colder. "It's the people's courtroom, and you just violated the very law you swore to uphold." The MPs moved in. Miller jerked his arm back, but they were faster. In a blur, one gripped his wrist, the other took his shoulder, and within seconds, the metallic click of handcuffs rang out. Gasps rippled through the room. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. David Ross leaned forward, eyebrows raised as if he couldn't believe he was actually seeing this. Judge Prentice stared down at her bench, her fingers tightening on the edge of the wood. Miller kept twisting, his face flushed red. "You can't do this. I'll have every one of you." That's when Leo stood. The shuffle of his chair was the only sound for a moment. He turned toward Miller, meeting his eyes with a calm so sharp it felt dangerous. His voice was low, deliberate, every word a nail in the coffin. "You thought you were above the law?" Leo said, not looking away for even a heartbeat. "Turns out the law was above you all along." It was quiet enough to hear the faint hum of overhead lights. No one moved. No one spoke. Miller froze for half a second, just long enough for everyone to see the truth settle on his face before the MPs guided him toward the door. His boots scraped against the floor, as if even gravity was pushing him out. When the heavy doors closed behind them, the silence in the room felt almost holy. Judge Prentice's eyes flickered toward Leo, but she didn't say a word. Instead, she looked down, the weight of what had just happened pressing her gaze to the desk in front of her. Her gavel sat untouched. Sarah, sitting just behind Leo, exhaled slowly. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, small, restrained, but carrying the quiet triumph of someone who'd just seen justice take its first real step. And Leo. He simply sat back down, the faintest shadow of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The storm had shifted, and everyone in that room knew nothing about this case would ever be the same again. The courtroom doors swung open, and the hallway exploded into chaos. Reporters surged forward, their voices overlapping into a frantic wall of sound. Questions were hurled from every direction, sharp, urgent, hungry. "Mr. Vance, do you have a statement? Is it true you were part of the Green Berets? Officer Miller, was he targeting you because of your heritage?" Camera shutters fired in rapid bursts, their flashes strobing across Leo's face. The air smelled of coffee, paper, and the faint chemical tang from flashbulbs. Leo didn't rush. He stepped forward with measured strides, General Thorne just half a pace behind him, the quiet weight of authority in every movement. He didn't shield his eyes from the cameras, didn't duck his head. Instead, he gave a small, steady smile, not of victory, but of resolve. A young reporter shoved her mic toward him. "What do you want people to take away from what happened in there?" Leo paused for just a moment. His gaze moved over the crowd, the faces pressed in tight, the pens poised above notebooks. "That doing the right thing," he said quietly, "isn't about what's easy. It's about what's necessary." He didn't wait for the follow-up. Thorne guided him through the press, the MPs clearing a narrow path toward the waiting black Humvee idling at the curb. The door opened, and Leo climbed in. Thorne followed, closing it with a solid, final thud that seemed to shut out all the noise from outside. From the courthouse steps, Ben stood with his camera bag slung over his shoulder. He had stayed silent during the press frenzy, his eyes following Leo until the Humvee began to pull away. He glanced down at his notebook where the headline draft was still scribbled. He didn't write another word. Instead, he closed it gently, almost ceremonially, and thought, "This isn't just a story, it's a reminder." The Humvee rolled forward, sliding into the flow of traffic. Inside, Thorne leaned back, his eyes fixed ahead, while Leo turned toward the window. The city blurred past in streaks of gray and gold, the afternoon light catching on the glass. Leo's reflection stared back at him, older than the man in the photographs from his army days, maybe a little more tired, but steady. His gaze drifted past his own image to the streets outside. People walked, talked, lived their lives without knowing what had just shifted in that courthouse. And maybe that was the way it should be. He didn't need applause. He didn't need headlines. He just needed to know that for today, at least, justice had found its way to the surface. The Humvee turned a corner, and the courthouse vanished from view. And in that quiet moment, with the hum of the engine beneath him and the faint sound of the city beyond the glass, Leo let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Justice, he thought, isn't only written in the law, it's carried by the people willing to stand for what's right, no matter the cost. Sometimes a story isn't just about what happened. It's about what it leaves behind. Today's chapter reminded us that justice isn't only about laws and courtrooms. It's about courage, truth, and the quiet strength to stand your ground when it matters most. If this story spoke to you, take a moment to hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful, meaningful tales. Your support isn't just a number. It's the reason our team can keep bringing you stories that move hearts and open minds. At Mr. Mac's Stories, we believe every voice matters, every truth deserves to be heard, and every listener is part of the journey. That's our mark, our signature, and with you here, it's a mark that lasts.